All right, AP World History students, welcome to your Unit 8 exam review. We're right here at the end of the year. Uh, Big idea, of course, here is the Cold War, although we'll break it up in a couple of subheadings. All right, so first let's look at the consequences of World War II, which is, of course, going to provide us the context for the Cold War. But the United States and Soviet Union both emerge as world superpowers following World War II. The economy of America becomes very productive, and there's a lot of prestige for the Soviet Union for defeating the Germans. In Japan, they're going to be occupied by the United States. They're going to adopt a democratic constitution, the MacArthur Constitution. We're also going to divide Berlin. Remember that Berlin is divided into four parts: America, France, and Britain, as well as the Soviet Union in the east. Eventually, those parts will be consolidated into a West Berlin, East Berlin, and of course, West Germany, East Germany. Remember, there's an issue that the capital city of Berlin is behind enemy lines. It is in the Soviet sphere of influence, and that will lead to many things, such as the Berlin blockade, which will result in the Berlin airlift. So understand those particular things. Without a doubt, you get a massive arms race that results following World War II. We got to build bigger and better atomic bombs. Of course, in 1949, when the Soviets explode their first atomic bomb, that's going to accelerate the arms race and the mass production of nuclear weapons. In the early 50s, America will drop a hydrogen bomb that will soon be followed by the Soviets as well. Another consequence of World War II, of course, is decolonization and independence in areas such as Indonesia. And of course, we'll lead into decolonization here. Most of the African nations, which had previously been held by European nation states, will receive their independence. And you still have a lot of issues because the African states who are getting independence are holding to those old boundaries that had been instituted from their colonial days. And the problem is, of course, just like it was back then, that you have a lot of ethnic issues. You have groups that are blood enemies, trapped in the same political boundaries as each other. So that has a lot of issues going on with it there. You had several leaders. Of course, most of these leaders oppose colonial rule, but here are three important ones. Ho Chi Minh, of course, with North Vietnam. He ascribes to communism. He is going to force the French out of French Indochina or Vietnam and Laos, Cambodia, that area. Jomo Kenyatta for Kenya, Kwame Nkrumah. These guys they want African independence. They're going to get it. Now, again, it comes with some issues, but they are going to get that independence that they're seeking. We spent a good amount of time on the partition of India. That the basis of this is off of religious reasons. 75% roughly Hindu, 25% roughly Islam. Britain, one thing Britain was doing when they had control was keeping the Muslims safe from the Hindus. When the partition happens, we realize very quickly that there's going to have to be a two-state system. And so this will lead to the creation of Pakistan. Of course, there was a West and East Pakistan, but eventually that will become just Pakistan in the West. And in the East, you'll get Bangladesh and some other areas there. That Pakistan is Islam, of course, that's Muslims comprising it. There are a few people trapped. I don't want to say trapped. I mean, they're there, but you have some Hindus in Pakistan and you have some Muslims in India, even after the partition. But you see, of course, massive migrations across India, and you have somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million deaths, resulting in really this bizarre event in history. Nationalism will rise up with decolonization as opposition to the old Western imperialism. Again, if you're the people of Kenya, then you don't believe that anyone outside of Kenyans should be running your country. And so nationalism, of course, will rise up because of this. Now, the Cold War itself was an ideological battle, this battle between communism and socialism as systems versus democracy and capitalism as systems. You can sort of trace some of the origins back to the fact of George Kennan, who was an American diplomat in Moscow. He was the one who saw the Soviets as very much an international threat. But because of their nuclear power, we're not talking about trying to beat the Soviets. We're not trying to do what Napoleon and Hitler failed to do and try to invade the Soviet Union. No, rather, we should contain communism, not necessarily destroy it where it exists, but only keep it from spreading. There's a lot of alliances that come into being. Of course, NATO is probably the most important, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's America, Canada, and 10 other Western European nations. An attack against one is an attack against all. It's meant to keep communism from spreading. The Soviets will retaliate with their own alliance called the Warsaw Pact in 1955. NATO comes about in 1949. You also have CETO, another American-led alliance, Southeastern Alliance Treaty Organization, because you got to watch with China, especially. You got to watch for the spread of communism in Southeast Asia as well. The Prague Spring, that's going to be a minor uprising against the Soviets, not as hardcore as the Hungary uprising in '56. Which was smashed with tanks and some 30,000 people killed. But in Prague, they try to resist the Soviets, and they try to go for freedom of speech and stuff like that. But it is also going to be put down. The Soviets don't take kindly to that sort of nonsense. In the late 80s and 90s, you eventually saw a lessening. A lot of that goes to Gorbachev and his glasnost, his openness in the Soviet Union, his perestroika, his economic restructuring, and really the fact that he is unwilling to send in tanks and troops to force these republics in the USSR to adhere to party politics. Okay, so eventually we will see the fall of the Soviet Union. And with that, when the Soviet Union falls and it's no longer communist, well, there's no longer a purpose for the Cold War. You can also argue that some of the factors was America outspending the Soviets. The Soviets were trying to match American spending capability, which they could never do. But probably more than anything, Gorbachev's policies were the reasons for the ending of it. All right, China. Remember that China's going to fight a civil war. We're going to get Kai-shek and his nationalists versus Mao Zedong and his communists. Eventually, in 1949, Mao Zedong, who appeals to the peasants, would be the victor. Part of this is because many of the nationalist forces were chewed up by the Japanese in World War II. But regardless, Mao Zedong is going to win more popular appeal. He is going to get land. He's going to take land away from wealthy landowners in the beginning, but eventually he's going to get everybody in these huge, just like the Soviets, these communes, these large farms. You've got tens of thousands of people. Supposed to be more efficient. Doesn't really ever work out that way. He has like his, part of this is under his Great Leap Forward system, and that's going to result in tens of millions of people starving and dying. It's really bad. The communist revolution itself was shaped by nationalism. Remember that the Chinese were being run around by the Europeans. They were being dominated by Europeans and Americans. And then, of course, you saw the Japanese coming in. And so, they're wanting China back. They're wanting back where they belong. All right. That's an overview of your test. And, you really go through your book and find the topics, the vocabulary words and whatnot. Go to Quizlet and look at Cold War stuff. Prepare yourself as best as you can for this exam. I think if you keep the big themes in mind, you're going to be successful. All right, guys, thank you and good luck.